Hello, everybody. My name is Ash Davies. I'm a lead engineer in Berlin for EMEA Scout, and I'm a Google developer expert for Kotlin and Android. And today I'm going to talk about material UX for engineers. Now, the term UX, UI is probably going to be a little bit interchanged here, so you'll have to forgive me. And yeah, this talk is sort of about my experience with always receiving iOS designs or designs that weren't really native for Android, and sort of how to deal with that and how to manage that in the workplace, perhaps. I've also not timed this one yet, so sorry if it runs short. So design, people ignore design that ignores people. If you don't keep in mind inclusivity when you're designing your interfaces, then you're going to upset a lot of people. And design tends to be one of those quite divisive things where you're not always able to win everybody over, but you can upset a lot of people very easily. So picture this. It's a sunny, bright new Monday morning. You're filled with energy as you've woken up in the morning. The sun is shining, everything's great. You remember that you're an Android developer, so life is good and you're a happy person. You go into work in the morning and your product owner meets you with a happy smile, ready to present you with the new feature that we're about to work on, solve all of your user woes and bring countless 5-star reviews. You get excited, why wouldn't you? This is why we got into it in the first place, right? You enjoy creating new features, you enjoy creating new things for your users to enjoy. So it's really filling you with pride when you get to see your users using these things and enjoying the fruit of your labors. So a lot of gratification for this. So we get to the feature briefing and you see this new feature. Okay, so it looks quite nice from the iOS perspective. A lot of care has gone into it, a lot of consistency with the existing guidelines. And then we see the Android version. This is not the same. Well, no, it is the same. That's the problem. So if you are lucky enough to actually receive Android designs, you may be familiar with this site, and that's just seeing the same iOS designs but put into an Android frame. Now, a lot of things might be rushing through your head right now. If you're anything like me, first step was, well, surely no, this should be a problem. This can't be true. There's denial. Then anger. Why? Why is this happening to us? Why does I deserve this? Why is this not getting the right amount of respect? Bargaining. I just like this GIF. And then ultimately depression and acceptance. But I'm not going to cover acceptance here because that sort of runs counterintuitive to the rest of this presentation. So no, I'm not going to accept these designs. I'm going to work towards getting a better situation, and this doesn't mean I'm going to reject them, but I'm going to then work collaboratively and employ diplomacy to work with my designers and improve the situation. So what is the problem here? Let's put this into business terms, then it can be more easily understandable. So ignoring user expectation for navigation and UX is sort of going to alienate your consumers. And this is going to have unnecessary friction in the user interactions that you're hoping to kind of improve upon. So it breaks user affordance expectations. User affordance is a highly critical thing that I think is not given enough attention, and that is the expectation that an object is going to perform towards its function. So, for example, you look at a door handle and you think, okay, I'm going to use my hand and turn that. That's because that's what it affords. So if you use consistent components on Android that are consistent in the look and feel for the environment and for the ecosystem, then people are going to assume, yeah, that's a button, I can click that, and it's going to behave in the way that they expect it's going to do. which means you don't have to train your users. You don't have to deviate from the norm. You can then allow things to run as they should normally. It actually has a longer development time as well, which is unexpected. But if you have to custom roll or make changes to default components all the time, then this is going to add significant development cost. It's going to add technical debt, and it's going to add a whole host of things that you wouldn't have to deal with otherwise. And there's no benefit of a cross-platform. So, there's a lot of arguments for whether you might want to use Flutter or using React Native. These things sort of fall short because you're not easily able to build a native user interface or user experience. So if we're already working native, then we definitely should actually make use of these things. So consumer alienation was the first topic. This affects our ability to retain consumers, because if they're not having an enjoyable time in your application, why are they going to come back to it? You're going to have a potential reduced session duration, because if as I said, if the user's not enjoying their time inside the application, then they're going to want to not going to want to stay there very long, or they want to perform the function and then leave. So you'll have increased bounce rates. Consumer indifference is a real concern as well. If your consumer actually has no strong feelings about your application, then, well, they're very likely to uninstall it or forget to actually use it again. And then ultimately, an increased uninstall rates. So, you're absolutely not retaining any consumers there because, well, you've ignored them. So they're going to uninstall your application. The problem with this is that it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you ignore your users for a particular platform and then they uninstall, you're not going to get enough users for that platform for stakeholders to then view it as important, which is a real crying shame. But moving on. So user affordance, is the user able to quickly assess the application as familiar, and will they be able to act on it without much training, or without any training, hopefully. So if you're not following user affordance guidelines, your user is going to have an increased learning curve to then get used to the way you're doing things in your application. You're going to risk consumer frustration. So if the user isn't able to achieve results in a short enough time frame, they're likely either to give up or become angry at your application. And that's the worst thing you want, is to upset or anger your users. Now, in some circumstances, this can be resolved, or not resolved, but alleviated with onboarding or some hints or showcase things. For example, you could use a material showcase view, which is where the rest of the view is occluded, and you highlight the area that is what you want to promote, or you could use a snack bar or a toast or a dialogue or some way of introducing the user to this new feature. But then, of course, this requires additional development time, which is not ideal. And, it's something else that is a potential point of failure. It could introduce bugs, it could introduce inconsistencies, and then you're going to have to maintain that. It would be much easier if the feature was intuitive in the first place. So, for example, I mentioned earlier the example of a door handle. So user affordance is critical with mobile design due to the reduced and highly contested screen real estate. You need to get your users through the happy path as frictionless as possible. So imagine a door handle. It's pretty intuitive. Its shape resembles that of the inside of your palm. It's sort of curved, and our tiny lizard brains can put two and two together and figure out that we need to use our hands to put pressure on in a radial motion. So, you could also compare this to a tap as well. It's intuitive. It's very easy to understand which way this goes. Actually, I personally always struggle with these. Always getting the hot or the cold side correct because I'm actually colorblind. But it's simple enough to look at this object and figure out how it works, and that's how your app should be. The user should be able to look at it and think immediately how to use it, where to go, how to navigate, and how to use these things in an effective way. Here's an example of something that is not following user affordance. What do I do with this? Do I push or pull? So it's very easy to screw up user experience. And when you do, it has significant implications. So how does this affect development? So not being able to use default components. So the material material library provides a lot of pre-built, prefabricated components, which you can quite easily use in your application and use with sketch files and with tooling support. And it accelerates mobile development significantly. That's the whole game with the Jetpack library. And this means that you don't have to faff about with trying to get these things pixel perfect because they will most of the time be appropriate right out of the box. So if you're having to make deviations from the standard design patterns, then this is going to require extra care. It's going to require extra design review, and it's going to be expensive to build these each time because you're not following a consistent set of guidelines. This would be particularly pertinent as well with different features because I'm not sure if this applies to you, but this is certainly applied to me, where features will be designed by different designers or by at least the same designer, but further later on in the lifestyle of the application. So without following a consistent style guide or component set, then what's going to happen is each feature will have a different variation, and then your application is going to be sort of like a Frankenstein's monster of all these different things. And that's even worse. Like, being inconsistent with material design is one thing, but being inconsistent with yourself is something that should be really avoided. So material design comes with a myriad of available components predefined to fulfill material design best practices for all platforms. And you can be relatively put at ease by the fact, these are going to be out of the box working the way they should. So you shouldn't really be able to have to make that many changes. And if you do, these components actually have support for various things. For example, the floating action button with the snack bar, the way it moves up, or the way that you can have the floating action bar as a intersected part of your bottom sheet, or actually intersected into the navigation drawer as well. There's lots of support for these things for creativity and some kind of bending of the material design guidelines. So finally, native support. So when you're considering native over cross-platform, and every company surely has, you get the questions, what is the benefit of going with native? Because cross-platform is quite an attractive thing to a lot of companies because of the concept of only having to hire half the amount of developers. Obviously, many of us know this is a fallacy, but still it's attractive to some people. But the point is, why should we be developing for native? What benefit does this provide? Now, of course, we can say that, being closer to the metal of the device gives us more flexibility and more capacity. We can use more memory, we can use some storage on disk. We have more engagement opportunities, but depending on your application, it really would depend on how or why this is going to be the case. So, the primary purpose for the native development is to provide a native user experience, and that is going to include having a native components, native UI, native look and feel. It's going to rely quite heavily upon that. You're going to have user engagement options, so being able to use notifications accurately. I'm aware there are ways to do this without having a native app, but it's a little bit easier. And you're going to have increased hardware capacity. Now, this is not appropriate to everybody, but in the cases of device-intensive applications, then yeah, you're going to have the capacity to make use of more hardware here. So all in all, you should probably be able to use these arguments as a good enough case to convince any sane person that native user experience is a good idea. But you might receive the answer, well, yeah, that's a great idea, but we can't prioritize that right now, or we don't have capacity, or whatever reason. So you can then also come to the case with data. Data is your biggest tool, or your most helpful tool in this respect. And that's because it's just so influential. I quite like referring to this quote from Jim Barksdale. If all we have is data, then let's look at data. If all we have is opinions, then let's go with mine. All the more reason to go with data. So you can find statistics that sort of help you out here. And one that you can always go with is market share, because this is always quite indicative of how many Android users are actually out there. Now, if you start off with typically affluent countries, you see quite a high iPhone usage. This is the same with the US as it is with Japan. But if you move towards more third world countries and countries that are bad at making decisions, you can see that it's sort of moving towards this more preferable trend. And finally, with Germany, you can see that it's quite high, actually, 70%. So to think about that, 70% of Android users in Germany, and we're not targeting them. So it's quite an interesting thing to consider, because you're not developing for your target audience here. If your target audience is 70% Android, and you're ignoring them, then that's not fantastic. And this is amplified even further when you look at emerging and developing markets, such as China, which is 80% Android, Brazil, 85%, Nigeria, again, 85%, and finally, India, 96%. So these are very, very high numbers, and it's a very good reason to consider Android and native Android design when building your features and applications. But it's also equally important to look at your own market segment, because these numbers don't tell you the whole picture, as they're rather generalized. So you're going to make sure you have to find the numbers for your target audience. And this is obviously helpful if you have an app already in the wild, but you can obviously use some metrics from somewhere, or from competing applications perhaps, to find out what your target audience is going to look like. And in the case of a popular real estate platform in Germany, this was actually around 35%. So not hugely reflective of the 70% that I shared with you earlier. But this is going to be affected by market segments, by whether you're targeting B2B or B2C, or generally just what your target audience looks like. If you're targeting business users, then it's likely to be skewed in this favor as well. But you can have a significant amount of users. So this particular application has upwards of 280,000 daily active users, which is enough to justify taking some consideration for this. So you can use your daily active users as a data point to kind of provide this convincing argument. You can use things like revenue per user. If you are more able to monetize your users' experience on one platform than the other, then this is obviously going to have higher revenue for the same amount of work. User retention, this is a really important thing, as I mentioned earlier. If you can keep your user in inside your ecosystem for a longer amount of time, then it's going to increase possibility for monetization later on. So this is obviously going to have an impact. And if your user retention is rather low, then this is actually a good data point to use to say how you can improve it. And again, the install rate and session duration are sort of big indicating factors. If these numbers are particularly low on one platform as they are from another, you could use that as a reason to investigate the user experience as to why there's drop-off, why there's bounce, and why your users aren't sticking around for as long as you'd like. So ultimately, why material? If the usage of material design is so beneficial for Android, then why are we still getting inappropriate designs? Well, much of it can be down to awareness, understanding, or simply just time restraints. It's important to note as well that Apple and iOS have a significant presence in the business world. This is perhaps due to the social the social importance of having an iPhone or using an iPhone, the perception, the fact that most hardware leasing companies prefer or offer iPhone devices as their flagship. There's a whole lot of reasons this is the case, but this does unfortunately introduce a bias in the workplace. So these are obviously favorable devices for many reasons. So in some cases, people are just simply not aware of these other design practices. And that's okay. I mean, we can't win the world over and expect everyone to use an Android device, even though that'd be fantastic. You just have to accept that this is going to be a thing, and we need to become our own advocate for material design. So material design is obviously a design system backed by open source code that helps teams build high quality digital experiences. That's the tagline. But as Android developers, we are already intimately familiar with material design. And if you're not, then we definitely should be. There's a whole wealth of design resources available on the material website. Actually, as well with the blog, which I found particularly quite interesting and useful as a resource. But I'm going to go over the principles of design for you. So a material metaphor is a unifying theory of a rationalized space and system of motion. Material is grounded in tactile reality, inspired by our own study of paper and ink, yet open to imagination and magic. Sounds magical. So the point here is that material design is supposed to represent physical services, things like card on paper, also cards and paper. So it could be represented in the real world, and it has that sort of tactile, cathartic response to it. So it's interactive, it behaves tactfully in response to touch. Surfaces should be intuitive and natural. So the surfaces and edges provide visual cues. It sort of guides us towards items that could be interactable. And it sort of speaks to the primal parts of our brains that help us quickly understand affordances. Again, affordance coming in to play. Dimensionality further affects affordance. So things that are visibly closer to the user in like a 3D space conveys more importance of that element. So having these moving parts and things floating above each other, it allows us to sort of perceive logical sections and areas that should interact with each other or should not interact with each other as is necessary. One of the nice things about material design is that it's bold. It encourages use of bold graphics and strong colors, saturated colors. And it's very attention-grabbing. It's very clear and easy to use. It's almost applicable to a children's toy, perhaps. One of the interesting quotes I've heard over time has been, when you're designing an interface, you should imagine that you're designing it for a child, that it should be so intuitive, so obvious and easy to use that a child could use it. And that's true for the typography, that it's very clear and draws your attention to the points that need to be drawn attention to. And that the color, surface, and iconography should emphasize action. So it should be immediately obvious that this is a button that I can press that's going to add something. These use of things together all contribute towards user affordance and the expectation that this is going to do something. Another principle is that user initiates change. So the energy and the sort of direction of travel of, or the vector of movements should always be in response to a user's interaction. Things that autonomously animate are generally confusing. And the touch should represent things that the user has invoked. And the motion that cascades from a touch should respect and reinforce the user as the primary source of movement. So this should play automatically. Yes. So elements that interact with the user show contextual relevance and allowing them to manipulate the environment as though it were an actual physical emulating real-world physics. So you can see how these items sort of move up and down in response to user action. And this level of elevation really does infer importance and user interaction, and it's the focus of the user's behavior at that moment of time. So motion provides meaning. It should be meaningful, appropriate, and serving to focus attention and maintain continuity. The feedback should be subtle and clear. Where you're using transitions should be efficient and coherent and not contrived or, well, pointless. You want to make sure that your motion is not there for the purpose of there being motion, because it focuses attention and maintains its continuity through subtle feedback. And these transitions need to be coherent and to the point. So as elements appear on the screen, they're going to transform and reorganize the environment with interactions, generating new transformations. So it's really important. Let's loop this video again. Let's hope it autoplays. So here you can see how movement is a transition between different states is applied. It's to the point, it's succinct, it's following in from where the user clicked. So for example, when the user clicked on the album art then came to the larger view. This is a shared element transition, and it applies context to what the users interacted with. And it just adds to having a more pleasant experience. So there's also the principles of navigation. These are documented from the navigation library, but they are not exclusive to the navigation library. You should generally be following these principles, even if you're not using Jetpack navigation. And that is having a fixed start point. So the start destination should be a fixed entry point. That's always true. So if the user's coming in from the navigation drawer, or from, sorry, not the navigation drawer, from the app drawer, or from a deep link, they should have the same start destination. It should be representable as a last in, first out stack. So this is the stack where they're going to be on top of each other and then popped off one after the other. You don't want to confuse that with the first in, first out, because that would be incorrect. It also unifies the behavior of up and back. Now, this has always been quite confusing or divisive in the Android community. How should these behave? And it's quite simplifying, or quite nice to have a simplifying aspect of, just have them interact the same, with the exception of the up button never being used to exit your app. This is actually handled much more easily than you might expect, and that is when you are at the top level or the entry point of your application in the first screen, you simply don't show the back button. You would show a hamburger icon, a navigation icon, or simply just nothing. You just have your title there. And navigation handles that by default. So deep linking should also simulate manual navigation. This is when, if the users come to the details of, in this circumstance, the avocado, then when the user navigates back, they should be able to go through a synthetic backstack, which is also generated by the Jetpack navigation component, which is fantastic. But these are the principles of navigation that you should be following anyway, and I feel these tie in with user experience and material design in this factor. Obviously, if not using the navigation library already, I highly recommend you do so. There's lots of great things about it, but I won't go into it in this talk. I've actually given another talk about navigation, so feel free to check that out on YouTube. I'm going to go into a few material studies. Now, what is really fantastic about the material design website is that it provides these case studies of individual fictitious applications where they've used material components quite elegantly. So Crane is a travel app that helps users find and book their travel, lodging, restaurants, options, and match their input preferences. Along with being both functional and informative, the Crane app allows the user to filter through various things to kind of customize the content so it's relevant to the user. The flow structure is sort of task-based, so it sort of requires screens to be handled in sequential order, consecutive order. So like a wizard type of thing, going through the process, selecting your flights, selecting your price brackets and such. It's a flexible aesthetic, and like I said, the flow structure is task-based. The user is able to then filter their content. Sorry, I meant to do the bullet points before I was speaking. One of the nice things about this as well is how it uses its color schemes to accentuate native components. So this is actually handled by default in material design components, but it's reflected very well in the end result. And if, like me, you've received lots of designs where there's lots of inconsistencies, or the sliders are non-standard, or, for example, they look very, very much different from this. But one of the features used in this material study that I'm particularly partial to is the backdrop component. And I've not seen so many implementations of this in the wild, which have been quite so nicely done. So the backdrop back layer is persistent, sort of displaying the controls and the content above it. So whereas normally your action bar would sit above your content pane in the elevation, this is actually in reverse. So the backdrop layer is persistent and displays controls and content for the front layer. It's immediate, so the backdrop back layer can be accessed from any scroll position. It's immediately accessible. It's quite easily gesturable and sort of utilizes space that couldn't have been already made use of. And finally, it's contextual. It's going to focus action on one layer at a time. It's going to be supportive of the existing content layer that we already have in play. And now the reason why I really like this is that it integrates so beautifully with the action bar, and it utilizes space that you didn't already have. You can simply just swipe down, and then you've got this contextual filtering option. And it is so cohesive with the action bar, which is really nice. Another example is Fortnightly. Fortnightly is an app that covers on news. It's a very typical news reader application. So it focuses on copy and trying to emulate this newspaper look and feel in a digital format. It's content focused, so of course, focusing on content and focusing on the articles and headlines that it has to offer. Its aesthetic uses sort of a grayscale color palette and photography to stand out. And the typographic scale is consistent and uses the long body to copy, to make it easy to read. And you can see that the layout grid actually draws inspiration from newspapers as well to provide this intuitive structure that lends itself well to news environments. The catalog contains categorized hierarchical information. The top levels consisting of peers that may contain subordinate information. So this sort of hierarchical structure is quite easy to perceive and understand from looking at it from a glance. And it's also using the navigation drawer to have this branding moment. So I'm not sure if you can see it in the image to the left, but you can see in the action bar on the mobile screen, it's using the custom font for the brand to enforce the brand a little bit there. And that's done also with the navigation drawer. So another concept I wanted to highlight here as well is elevation. And this is surfaces showing elevation with shadows overlapping other surfaces. These are really important because it shows contextual relevance, as I mentioned earlier, to how what the user should be interacting with if they have just done it themselves. You can check out these principles at this URL here. I'll share the slides at the end. Finally, the third case study I'd like to highlight is that of Shrine. And Shrine uses a really interesting aesthetic. So it's sort of playing on its important role as a central unifying sort of scaffolding and the variety of products as brands showcased. What's really nice as well, it's using this angled cut thing to reinforce its brand. So you can see that in the shape of the main content sheet that's displayed above the action bar, again using the backdrop component, where it has this sort of cutout. And that sort of adjustment to material design is something that's now supported in version 2, and allows you to sort of reinforce your brand and really provide this custom user experience. And finally, we have overlapping sheets as well from the backdrop components that allows us to then reutilize elements that we didn't have available to us before. So again, to highlight the backdrop component, it's relevant, immediate, and contextual. It's used here with the catalog of items that they have to set for sale. And you can also see how the customized sort of corner cut has been applied to dialogues as well for a consistent brand experience. So let's also play this. So you can see how all of the design elements kind of really come together with this. How they've been styled from the default material components to then how it's been put into a whole desktop experience, and how it scales quite nicely when applied to that. So you can see the mobile view, the desktop view, or the tablet view. And these all have a consistent experience, one that flows from one to the other. And finally, not finally, but yeah, another case study I wanted to highlight, but Inbox by Gmail. Inbox was a really fantastic example of material design applied simply and elegantly to email, and we're all going to very dearly miss it. So there's also Material Design Awards every year that highlights some great implementations of material design. These are really good to check out every year and sort of vibe off and get inspiration from. This year was rough and expensive brand identity executive material theming. Sort of for note-taking and this consistent application of color, typography, and shape, which is quite nice. There's Reflectly, which is an app for like journaling, but digital journaling, applying material design to this as well. Gestures, this is sort of a nice way of learning, I think, Hindi here. And finally, Trip, which is a trip booking application. Cool, we're a few minutes now, so I guess we'll hurry up. So these showcase examples, there's also some material partner studies, which are really cool. I recommend checking out. You can get some information from and find these things out. So there's some components such as the top app bar, which should be persistent, guiding and consistent. App bar should be appearing at the top of the screen. They can be hidden depending on contextual content and should be immediately obvious and helpful to the user. I'm just going to go a little bit faster through this next screen because I think we're coming close to time. Yeah, this is going to highlight the bottom sheets. It should be supportive, flexible, and ergonomic. This is to highlight some misuses I've seen. Having the bottom sheet inset, so it's sort of floating or abandoned on its own there, or having too much content. This is also familiar with feature creep, where you might have normally just thrown it into a navigation drawer. There's the often not commonly used collapsed bottom sheet, which can be misused in this way by showing multiple rows of content or having too much content in place when it's a bit unclear as to where the users can be drawn attention to. So as I mentioned at the start, there's a lot of things where UI is the concern, not necessarily user experience. And it reminds me of this quote, UI is the saddle, the stirrups, and the reins. But altogether, combining effective use of user interface with effective motion, with contextual elevation and color influences, all of these things put together are going to make this user experience and are going to make it more cohesive to Androids, and it's going to be more familiar to the user. And finally, designing should be fun. I think with so many different creative possibilities with material, it doesn't actually box you in as people might believe. There's lots of potential for creativity here. And designing should be as fun as the implementation should be, or the implementation should be as fun as the design should be. Point is, they should both be enjoyable. So we need to be able to sort of be an advocate for this and to share that joy or share that kind of enjoyment that can be had with the designs with those people who are designing them. So finding creative solutions to these genuine user experience problems is quite a fantastic thing. So finally, in closing, not finished yet. So yeah, here's an example of how material elements can be customized. I'm going to loop the video. And it's it's not locked in as you might think. So bringing this back home, how do I become an advocate for this in my own company? Well, you can hold internal presentations like the one I'm giving now. Feel free to copy. You can host code labs or design workshops that encourage understanding and sort of permeability and sort of figure this out. And finally, you can create collaborative guilds. We have various different guilds in our company for design and for Android, and where we sort of meet. And this level of diplomacy and bringing everyone together means that it's more, you have a stage, you have a forum for proposing these changes. You can advocate for material design amongst people who are more likely to have interest and gain buy-in from your colleagues. Make sure your designers using the appropriate tooling. These are some great resources. You should definitely be using them. If you're using Figma, Sketch, or XD, or Abstract, or whatever to version control your designs, you should absolutely work collaboratively and share the designs amongst your team to make sure that you're using a consistent user experience. And finally, final slide. It's the little things. So even taking the care to make sure that you're giving your users a native mobile experience, even with the little things like having like a little cutout for your brand, having consistent design or typography. These tiny little things all surmount to a larger user experience and make your app overall enjoying to use. And that's all I have. So thank you everybody for listening. Cool, some questions. How have you approached using material design where there aren't Android components pre-built? Progress banners, have you built these in-house from material IO specs or found other good resources to plug the gaps? Great question. There are unfortunately still some components missing from material design for Android, and they may be available for Flutter or for otherwise. Obviously, we want to try and avoid implementing them yourself, because then that's code you don't have to maintain. So we'll often do investigation as to what is available. And if there's an appropriate open source solution being used, then we'd look into how we could make use of that, ensuring that that project is being maintained, or we can then plan a deprecation policy if it's going to appear in the Android X libraries later. Ultimately, though, there are certain circumstances where you're going to have to implement it, or you just have to bite the bullet. So, yeah, in some circumstances, I think we have a custom-built progress bar, but the effort has been to utilize as much of the existing functionality as possible. So, trying not to re-implement the wheel as much as possible, but yeah, you're going to have to bite the bullet sometimes. Sadly, I've never met a designer running Android. How can we influence designers to switch from iOS? So this is something I didn't want to make a generalizing statement about it in the presentation, but absolutely. I have not yet met a designer that is using Android. In our team, I've tried to advocate dual use, so providing designers with an Android device, a work device that is Android as well as iOS. Ultimately, the decision on whether to use Android or iOS is a very personal one. I mean, if you're using it as your daily driver, it's got to be something that you personally want. And though I don't like iOS personally, some people do. So you can't really force that upon them, even though I would like to take their iPhones away. I'm facing this exact question. I think what I've suggested has been to have more test devices available. So especially, this is particularly hard now, all working from home. But if you can convince your company to, provide Android devices for your designers as well, and then sort of start sharing this knowledge and make it more accessible to them. No easy answer for that one, unfortunately. If you have any success, then please share that as well. I'll be very interested. Next question. So the first two we've answered. What would be your approach for medical applications where the users, example, doctors, need training for common UX practices? Oof, that's a tricky one. So, of course, in the context of using your application, you should rely upon user affordance and intuitive UI that the user should be able to kind of guess what's going on. In the context of specialized applications for medical practitioners, that's going to have a whole host of other problems or difficulties that you're going to need to solve. But those are specific to medical practices where I would definitely want a medical practitioner as a consultant to, verify these training things and what to do there. So I think that's perhaps exceeding the scope of material a little bit because there's potential for liability there. So I'm not qualified to answer that one, I'm afraid. How do you ensure visual feature parity between iOS and Android when using native platform design? Good question. Visual feature parity is perhaps, I would say you maybe don't always want that. Feature parity, sure, you want to be able to achieve the same thing on both platforms, unless you have a feature that is only available for one platform. But visual feature parity, you're going to be expecting these things to look exactly the same, and they don't need to look exactly the same. I mean, sure, you can have the wireframe that looks similar, that there's the same number of components or the same input fields, But they're going to look a little bit different sometimes, and this is particularly appropriate when you look at how Android and iOS handle dialogues differently and number inputs. Whereas you might have like a text field which has like a numerical stepper on it. This might be displayed as a dialogue or the appropriate terminology thing in iOS. So these experiences are going to differ slightly. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about achieving visual parity, but more feature parity. I think that's something that your designers and product owners would need to understand as well. So, if that's not the case, then you need to be an advocate for that. Next question. What sources can you recommend to learn more about material design? Material.io is, obviously it's a bit the first kind of resource I would suggest, but yeah, it's a massive wealth of resources there. The case studies are massively helpful. The documentation for all the components are really helpful. Besides material, I guess there's a few feeds that I subscribed to. I can't remember what these are called. Let me just double check. There's a few feeds I subscribe to for design, and these sort of provide a bit of inspiration sometimes. So there's UpLabs, Material Design blog, I think Android Niceties as well. These are various feeds that you can follow and sort of get an idea for creativity here. But if you're wanting to learn about the implementation, definitely material.io. I can't suggest anything that's better than that. What process do you have in place at Scout to ensure that UX and UI artifacts are following the material principles? So yeah, I mean, this has been my own experience of not always receiving these consistent designs, or they've been a bit off. So I've brought it to the attention of our design guilds, who were thankfully really receptive and wanted to learn more about this, which was fantastic reception. And we already use sort of version controls. We use Abstract to collaborate with our sketch designs, and these there's tools and libraries that we have for consistent UI elements. So building this these prefabricated components, even for yourself as an extension of the Android X or material design components, is already going to kind of make things much easier for you, because you don't have to redesign or reinvent these components all the time. So we've started building up this library of components and implementations available natively, so we can just reuse the same components without having to make changes. So that's already making our application very consistent, which is something I'd recommend to anybody else. And finally, is material design still applicable for Android TV apps where touch isn't the standard? Oh, interesting question. I don't have a straightforward answer to that one, actually. I haven't considered the aspect where touch not being the standard, you're interacting with it. I would say, in the interest of consistency, I would probably still go with a design that is that looks cohesive with your counterpart app if you have one for mobile. I think, as far as I'm aware, the Android TV experience is still very tile-based. So, cards are still sort of appropriate. But I think whilst touch is a very important part of material, it's not the only defining aspect. So I think it is definitely still applicable. Mandatory is a different question. Cool, and thank you to Anonymous. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Great, so thank you everybody for joining. Hope to catch you on Twitter or somewhere else.